angel screamed and dropped. Just above the dome, he seemed to flare with blue light and was gone. Air roared out through the dome, and more was disappearing into something that had been invisible. Now it showed as a blue pinpoint drifting towards the floor. Forward had turned to watch it fall. Loose objects fell across the chamber, looped around the pinpoint at meteor speed, or fell into it with bursts of light. Every atom of my body felt the pull of the thing, the urge to die in an infinite fall. Fun thought experiments like this story are why I love Niven's work. It's a crazy idea wrapped in a fun story, but it's all based on what we know, or at least what we knew at the time of writing. In this Beowulf Schaefer story, we start to see the world building of Larry Niven. We start to see reoccurring characters and their ties to other well-known characters. We learn for certain that Louis Wu, the main character of the Ringworld novels, is the biological son of Carlos Wu and is raised by Beowulf Schaefer. Cheryl and Beowulf had been denied a child by the Earth Fertility Board because of Beowulf's albinism, so they had asked a mutual friend, Carlos Wu, to help them out. Carlos was a genius with amazing genes, so he was one of only about 60 people out of the 18 billion Earth residents that had an unlimited birth license. And now, after Carlos's 2-year wedding license with Cheryl had expired, Beowulf was going to head back to Earth and remarry Cheryl so they could raise their family together. There was just one problem. Beowulf was stranded on Jinx. No ships were headed to Earth or leaving. Ships were disappearing in the Borderlands of the Sol system. So all non-essential travel had been shut down until the cause could be discovered. This is where we run into another reoccurring character, Sigmund Osfaller, who both planted a bomb on Beowulf's ship in the story Neutron Star. I didn't mention that at the time because the video was already getting a little longer than I wanted. The bomb was to keep Beowulf from just leaving with the ship instead of being blackmailed by the puppeteers into what amounted to a suicide mission, which would have been a truly sensible plan. But, thanks to Sigmund's bomb, that became impossible. The ship would explode if it was not returned on time. Sigmund also appears as a main character in the Fleet of Worlds novels. But in this story, Sigmund was both how Carlos Wu got off Earth and how he planned to get back. He had an undercover ship. From the outside, it appeared to be a cargo vessel, but beneath that facade was a war vessel filled to the brim with top-of-the-line tech and weapons, allowing it to do over 30 Gs of acceleration and destroy anything smaller than a moon. Sigmund had designed it specifically to catch whatever it was that was making ships disappear. A Trojan horse that hopefully would be attacked since it looked just like any other shipping vessel from the outside. Despite his dislike for Osfaller, Beowulf accepted Carlos's embarrassed offer to come with them back to Earth. Embarrassed because Wu had left Earth specifically so that he wouldn't run into Beowulf. Carlos, what are you doing here?
I left Earth a few weeks after Louis was born.
He was embarrassed. Why?
I haven't been off Earth in 10 years. I needed the break.
But he just left before I was supposed to get home. And hadn't someone once said Carlos Wu had a touch of the flatland phobia? I began to understand what was wrong. Carlos, you did Cheryl and me a valuable favor. He laughed without looking at me.
Men have killed other men for such favors. I thought it was tactful to be gone when you came home.
So Beowulf boarded the Hobo Kelly, the name of Sigmund's undercover war vessel. And on the trip, they discussed the possibilities for what may be making the ships disappear. Beowulf favored the idea that there were hyperbeasts, creatures that live in hyperspace, near gravity masses, and eat any ship that comes close. Wu and Osfaller thought he was insane. Sigmund was sure it was pirates, and Wu tended to agree. During the trip, Osfaller pulls out 2 pairs of tactical jumpsuits, full of hidden gadgets, and armored against laser weapons. He shows Wu and Beowulf how to use the gadgets, one of which is a pair of buttons that can be pulled off, and a microscopically small string of incredible strength, Sinclair monofilament, stretched between them, acting as a razor-sharp garrote. The long green line marking Sol was almost touching the surface of the mass sensor. I said, "Breakout in 10 minutes." And the ship lurched savagely. "Strap down," I yelled, and glanced at the hyperdrive monitors. The motor was drawing no power, and the rest of the dials were going bananas. I activated the windows. I'd kept them turned off in hyperspace, lest my Flatlander passengers go mad watching the blind spot. The screens came on, and I saw stars. We were in normal space.
Futz, they got us anyway.
Carlos sounded neither frightened nor angry, but odd. As I raised the hidden panel, Osfaller cried,
"Wait!"
I ignored him. I threw the red switch, and Hobo Kelly lurched again as her belly blew off. Osfaller began cursing in some dead Flatlander language. Now 2/3 of Hobo Kelly receded, slowly turning. What was left must show as what it was, a No. 2 General Products Hall, puppeteer built, a slender, transparent spear 300 feet long and 20 feet wide, with instruments of war clustered along what now was her belly. Screens that had been blank came to life, and I lit the main drive and ran it up to full power. Osfaller spoke with rage and venom.
"Schaefer, you idiot. You coward. We run without knowing what we run from. Now they will know exactly what we are. What chance that they will follow us now? This ship was built for a specific purpose, and you have ruined it."
"I've freed your special instruments," I pointed out. "Why don't you see what you can find?" Osfaller was upset. Beowulf had ruined his plans by blowing his cover and running, but they had nowhere to go. They no longer had a hyperdrive, and those 10 minutes in hyperspace equal 3 extra days in normal space. Only 3 mining tugs were in the vicinity, and nothing seemed to be chasing them. So Wu made a few hyperspace calls and found a research asteroid nearby where they could try and catch a ride on a ship with a working hyperdrive. For their own reasons, Beowulf and Sigmund agreed. It turned out that it was a research station run by a well-known gravity expert, a Jinxian by the name of Julian Forward. Osfaller decided to hide on the ship and not let them know he was there. He was paranoid of anyone in the area where their hyperspace drive had gone missing, and he was not planning on abandoning his ship anyway. So Beowulf and Carlos departed the Hobo Kelly for Forward's research asteroid. Carlos Wu had a few theories about what may have happened to their ship, and Dr. Forward was the perfect man to discuss them with.
What do you think, Carlos? Natural phenomenon or space monsters?
Pirates.
How are they going about it?
Well, this business of a hyperdrive motor disappearing and leaving the ship behind, that's brand new. I think it would take a sharp gravity gradient, with a tidal effect as strong as that of a neutron star, or a black hole.
You won't find anything like that in human space.
I know.
Carlos looked frustrated. That had to be faked. Earlier, he'd behaved as if he already had an answer. Forward said,
I don't think a black hole would have that effect anyway. If it did, you would never know it, because the ship would disappear down the black hole.
What about a powerful gravity generator?
Forward thought about it, then shook his massive head.
You are talking about a surface gravity in the millions. Any gravity generator I've heard of would collapse itself at that level. Let's see. With a frame supported by stasis fields. No, the frame would hold, and the rest of the machinery would flow like water.
You don't leave much of my theory.
Sorry.
Carlos ended a short pause by asking,
How do you think the universe started?
Forward looked puzzled at the change of subject, and I began to get uneasy. Given all that I don't know about cosmology, I do know attitudes and tones of voice. Carlos was giving out broad hints, trying to lead Forward to his own conclusions. Black holes, pirates, the Tunguska meteorite, the origins of the universe. He was offering them as clues, and Forward was not responding correctly. He was saying,
Ask a priest. Me? I lean towards the Big Bang. The steady state always seems so futile.
I like the Big Bang too. That 10 billion tons of neutronium now, that you were using for a test mass, that wouldn't be big enough or dense enough to give us enough of a gravity gradient.
It might, right near the surface.
Forward grinned and held his hands close together.
It was about that big.
And that's as dense as matter gets in this universe. That's too bad.
True, but have you heard of quantum black holes?
Yeah.
Forward stood up briskly.
Wrong answer.
I rolled out of my webbed chair, trying to brace myself for a jump, while my fingers fumbled for the third button on my jumper. It was no good. I hadn't practiced in this gravity. Forward was in mid-leap. He slapped Carlos alongside the head as he went past. He caught me at the peak of his jump and took me with him via an iron grip on my wrist. I had no leverage, but I kicked at him. He didn't even try to stop me. It was like fighting a mountain. He gathered my wrists in one hand and towed me away. So now Beowulf and Wu found themselves tied up. Meanwhile, the three tugs they had seen when they dropped out of hyperspace were coming at the research station, where the hobo Kelly was parked. Osfaller, seeing this, once again became paranoid. The same three tugs. It couldn't be a coincidence. But the tugs were unarmed. What should he do? He was forced to expose his existence by moving the ship so that the station was right behind the hobo Kelly from the tug's perspective. Sigmund hoped that this would prevent them from firing on him, but unbeknownst to him, these tugs really were unarmed. But what they were pulling was extremely deadly and invisible. A microscopic primordial black hole, with the mass of a large asteroid. It was Forward's life's work, to be the first man to discover a primordial black hole, and he succeeded, but only after his funding had been cut. So rather than report his findings and be forced to deal with more bureaucracy, he came up with a plan. Why rely on funding when he could get his own? All he had to do was place the black hole in the path of incoming or outgoing ships, and it would do just what it did to the hobo Kelly. Its sharp gravity gradient wouldn't affect the entire ship. It wouldn't have time. It would just affect the hyperdrive motor itself, ripping it free from the ship and dropping the ship back into normal space where he could rob it. And then, when he was done with it, he could feed the rest of it to his black hole. No evidence would remain. Sigmund Osfaller knew none of this, but something was clearly wrong. He saw it was the same three tugs that had been there when the hobo Kelly dropped out of hyperspace, and he knew that Forward was an expert in gravity, one of the few things well known for affecting hyperdrive engines. It felt too wrong, so out of sheer paranoia and a gut feeling, he fired on the first tug. I began trying to kick off my shoes. They were soft ship slippers, ankle high, and they resisted. I kicked the left foot free just as one of the tugs flared with ruby light.
He did it.
Carlos didn't know whether to be jubilant or horrified.
He fired on unarmed ships.
Forward gestured peremptorily. Angel slid out of his seat. Forward slid in and fastened the thick seatbelt. Neither had spoken a word. A second ship burned fiercely red, then expanded in a pink cloud. The third ship was fleeing. Forward worked the controls.
I have it in the mass indicator. We have but one chance.
So did I. I peeled the other slipper off with my toes. Over our heads, the jointed arm of the grabber began to swing, and I suddenly realized what they were talking about. Now there was little to see beyond the dome, the swinging grabber and the light of Hobo Kelly's drive, and the two tumbling wrecks, all against a background of fixed stars. Suddenly, one of the tugs winked blue-white and was gone. Not even a dust cloud was left behind. Osfaller must have seen it. He was turning, fleeing. Then, it was as if an invisible hand had picked up Hobo Kelly and thrown her away, the fusion light streaking off to one side and set beyond the dome's edge. With two tugs destroyed and the third fleeing, the black hole was falling free, aimed straight down our throats. Now there was nothing to see but the delicate motions of the grabber. Angel stood behind Forward's chair, his knuckles white with the grip on his chair's back. My few pounds of weight went away and left me in free fall. Tides again. The invisible thing was more massive than the asteroid beneath me. The grabber swung a meter more to one side, and something struck it a mighty blow. The floor surged away from me, left me head down above the grabber. The huge soft iron puppy dish came at me. The jointed metal arm collapsed like a spring. It slowed, stopped. "You got it!" Angel crowed like a rooster and slapped at the back of the chair, holding himself down with his other hand. He turned a gloating look on us, turned back just as suddenly. "The ship! It's getting away!"
No.
Forward was bent over the console.
I see him. Good. He's coming back straight towards us. This time there will be no tugs to warn the pilot.
The grabber swung ponderously towards the point where I'd seen Hobo Kelly disappear. It moved centimeters at a time, pulling a massive invisible weight. An Osfaller was coming back to rescue us. He'd be a sitting duck, unless... I reached up with my toes, groping for the first and fourth buttons on my falling jumper. The weaponry in my wonderful suit hadn't helped me against Jinxian strength and speed, but Flatlanders are less than limber, and so are Jinxians. Forward had tied my hands and left it at that. I wrapped 2 sets of toes around the buttons and tugged. My legs were bent pretzel fashion. I had no leverage, but the first button tore loose, and then the thread, another invisible weapon to battle Forward's portable bottomless hole. The thread pulled the 4th button loose. I brought my feet down to where they belonged, keeping the thread taut, and pushed backwards. I felt the Sinclair molecule chain sinking into the pillar. The grabber was still swinging. When the thread was through the pillar, I could bring it up in back of me and try to cut my bonds. More likely I'd cut my wrists and bleed to death, but I had to try. I wondered if I could do anything before Forward launched the black hole. A cold breeze caressed my feet. I looked down. Thick fog boiled out around the pillar. Some very cold gas must be spraying through the hair-fine crack. I kept pushing. More fog formed. The cold was numbing. I felt the jerk as the magic thread cut through. Now the wrists. Liquid helium? Forward had moored us to the main supporting power cable. That was probably a mistake. I pulled my feet forward carefully, steadily, feeling the thread bite through on the return cut. The grabber had stopped swinging. Now it moved on its arm like a blind, questing worm as Forward made fine adjustments. Angel was beginning to show the strain of holding himself upside down. My feet jerked slightly. I was through. My feet were terribly cold, almost without sensation. I let the buttons go, left them floating up towards the dome, and kicked back hard with my heels. Something shifted. I kicked again. Thunder and lightning flared around my feet. I jerked my knees up to my chin. The lightning crackled and flashed white light into the billowing fog. Angel and Forward turned in astonishment. I laughed at them, letting them see it. Yes, gentlemen, I did it on purpose. The lightning stopped. In the sudden silence, Forward was screaming,
Know what you've done.
There was a grinding crunch, a shuddering against my back. I looked up. A piece had been bitten out of the grabber. I was upside down and getting heavier. Angel suddenly pivoted around his grip on Forward's chair. He hung above the dome, above the sky. He screamed. My legs gripped the pillar hard. I felt Carlos's feet fumbling for a foothold and heard Carlos's laughter. Near the edge of the dome, a spear of light was rising. Hobo Kelly's drive, decelerating, growing larger. Otherwise, the sky was clear and empty, and a piece of the dome disappeared with a snapping sound. Angel screamed and dropped. Just above the dome, he seemed to flare with blue light, and was gone. Air roared out through the dome, and more was disappearing into something that had been invisible. Now, it showed as a blue pinpoint, drifting towards the floor. Forward had turned to watch it fall. Loose objects fell across the chamber, looped around the pinpoint at meteor speed, or fell into it with bursts of light. Every atom of my body felt the pull of the thing, the urge to die in an infinite fall. Now we hung side by side from a horizontal pillar. I noted with approval that Carlos's mouth was wide open, like mine, to clear his lungs so that they wouldn't burst when the air was gone. Daggers in my ears and sinuses, pressure in my gut. Forward turned back to the controls. He moved one knob hard over. Then he opened the seatbelt and stepped out, up, and fell. Light flared. He was gone. The lightning-colored pinpoint drifted to the floor and into it. Above the increasing roar of air, I could hear the grumbling of rock being pulverized, dwindling as the black hole settled towards the center of the asteroid. Osfaller was able to save Beowulf and Carlos in the nick of time, with the aid of a portable airbag to stick them in and a jetpack on his back. As they left, they watched the entire asteroid collapse in on itself, now part of the still microscopically small primordial black hole. Hey, thanks for watching. I really appreciate you staying this long, and since you did, hopefully that means you like my channel. So I'd really appreciate it if you would like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe so I can see you back here for the next one. Take care.